Zack Snyder, a name that instantly divides audiences and critics. The director, since his early work with Dawn of the Dead, has produced films that invite a mixed response. Some love his work, and others completely despise it. Where most mainstream blockbuster filmmakers have a specific formula or guide, Snyder consistently does what he wants to. We've seen this with his work on the newly created DC Extended Universe, as well as 2009's Watchmen, the film we'll be focusing on. In a weird way, Snyder was probably the best person to tackle this film. The filmmaker's attention to detail and eye for iconic moments crafted an almost match-made-in-heaven scenario. So, why do people hate Watchmen? When people bring up the best superhero films of all time, nobody mentions Snyder's Watchmen. Like most of his work, this film received mixed reviews. As I said before, some love it, some hate it. I fall into the category of the former. I unapologetically adore this movie. Of course, Snyder's movie is based on Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' 1986 comic book of the same name. Moore and Gibbons wrote a comic book about comic books. Snyder, in such an elegant manner, managed to do the same thing. However, instead of crafting a comic book film about a comic book, Snyder created a project that predicted the future of the comic book adaptation. It is in this that the filmmaker developed perhaps the best form of comic book, metafiction. So, before we get into Snyder's bombastic and irreverent interpretation of Watchmen, I want to clear up the definition of metafiction. It is a term that is thrown around a lot, and people sometimes misuse it. The Cambridge Dictionary states, "Metafiction is fiction which the author self-consciously alludes to the artificiality or literariness of a work by parodying or departing from novelistic conventions and traditional narrative techniques." Yeah. So in knowing that Snyder's adaptation of Watchmen abides by that checklist, it ticks all those boxes. To a society in 2009, people who have yet to meet the Guardians of the Galaxy or the Avengers, Watchmen must have been really strange. Why is this team of superheroes so broken? Why are they so depressed? Why is everything so dark? When promoting the film back in March of 2009, Snyder said the following.
It's just a Hollywood superhero movie, which is what a lot of people will think because they don't know, right? They see some guys fighting, and then when you see the film, you actually have this experience of it, being taken apart. Those archetypes, those mythological shapes.
Snyder literally says it. He is taking these characters apart, these archetypes, these stereotypes, and he's bringing them to our level. We are broken people. When Watchmen begins, we are thrown into this ultra-dark and violent world, an alternate reality where superheroes once reigned, but have now been forced into retirement by the United States government. We meet the comedian, sitting at home watching the news as it discusses the doomsday clock. Snyder's film instantly grabs the audience's attention. Where Moore's book was vibrant in colour, focusing on purple and red, Snyder throws all that away, instead deciding to highlight darkness. As a man, who is later revealed to be Ozymandias, breaks in and starts beating the comedian, a heavily stylised battle ensues. Snyder even goes to the effort of adding cheesy fist sounds, harkening to the 1960s Batman TV show. Nat Cole King's Unforgettable begins playing as the comedian is beaten and thrown to his doom. As the comedian lands on the cold floor, the audience is aware of a very essential component of Snyder's film. This is a superhero movie about superhero movies. This is taking everything Moore thought and felt about comic books and translating that for the screen. Snyder saw that Moore and Gibbons attacked comic books in their comic book, so he felt the need to attack comic book films in his comic book film. The stylized violence, the overly dark look, it is all utterly intentional. Watchmen concerns everything in the realm of superhero cinema. In fact, had you not known who Snyder is, you would have thought the film was adequate and full of tropes. The movie features a cheesy and larger-than-life supervillain, the previously mentioned Ozymandias. His costume is also impactful. Snyder wanted to parody the nipple suit from Batman and Robin, so he gave the character these rather large nipples. Where Moore attacked the comic book trope of cheesy costumes, Snyder attacked the film equivalent of that. When the audience is introduced to Ozymandias, we see Night Owl looking at Watchmen merchandise. Snyder instantly shows the audience the commercial appeal of such a being, of such a superhero, of such an Ozymandias. The character is perfectly named as well, deriving from Percy Shelley's sonnet of the same name. One of the poem's themes is the inevitable decline of all leaders and their empires. When the audience hears of Ozymandias' plan, we're instantly reminded of his villainous ways and the crumble of society. The character remarks,
"The comedian was right. Humanity's savage nature will inevitably lead to global annihilation. So in order to save this planet, I had to trick it with the greatest practical joke in human history."
Now, Ozzy's plan is horrible in its concept, as Night Owl states,
"Killing millions."
To which Ozymandias responds,
"To save billions. A necessary crime."
Ozzy's plan is literally annihilation, where superhero films like Avengers Age of Ultron or X-Men Apocalypse use this as a serious plot device. Snyder pokes fun at the sheer absurdity of such a plan.
"Grow up."
Rorschach tells Ozymandias,
"No, we can't let you do that."
to which, as sly as a dog, Ozzy responds,
Do that, Rorschach? I'm not a comic book villain. Do you seriously think I'd explain my masterstroke to you if there were even the slightest possibility you could affect the outcome? I triggered it 35 minutes ago.
Snyder deconstructs the idea of world-ending, larger-than-life villains. He shows the stupidity of these characters, the ones who babble and talk when they should really just initiate their plan. Fans have complained about this since the film's release. Many believe Snyder didn't understand the character, when in reality, Snyder used the character to represent his views on villain tropes. Another huge criticism of Watchmen is the way Snyder tackles violence. The graphic novel builds towards that shocking violence of the finale, where Snyder jumps straight into it. In an interview with Paul Byrne, Snyder addresses Moore's comic book and its opinion on comic book violence.
Alan punishes you a little bit for liking comic book violence, you know? Part of it is that, like, you understand, if you're a comic book fan or a fan of comic book movies, I think if you haven't read a comic book, it's okay to see Watchmen, because if you've seen a comic book film or know that comic books exist, you're kind of prepared for it. But it's that whole thing, if he lures you into a scenario where in a normal comic book film or you know, the violence you would get would be really sort of morally clear. There's a little bit, you get a little bit of punishment for assuming that everything's going to be, like, you know, glossed over and clean and easy to understand, you know. I think that's where the movie kind of comes at you a little bit.
What Snyder is saying here is rather simple. Moore addressed comic book violence by not glorifying it. The filmmaker goes a completely opposite direction because he has to. Looking back on Watchmen in 2017, the movie is perhaps more relevant as superhero metafiction today than when it was released back in 2009. The ultra-violent and excessive action and gore is a straight-up attack on the audience. Snyder is poking his finger at the audience and asking them, do you really like this? One major example of this is found when Night Owl and Silk Spectre break into the prison to get Rorschach out. A one-panel image from Moore's novel is expanded to a 5-minute action sequence. Snyder is not ruining the source material. He is showing what he believes audiences want to see with these big-budget films. Violence. And lots of it. Another character in Watchmen who represents the comic book genre or attacks it is Dr. Manhattan. In an extremely clever manner, Snyder constructs the character's origin story in the space of minutes. Where most films would detail his story, his shortcomings, Snyder has no time for that. He develops him in seconds. Dr. Manhattan's arrival is treated exactly how a real civilization would treat the birth of a super, with patriotism. When a news anchor introduces his audience to the situation, he states,
Around the world still reeling from this morning's announcement, possibly the most significant event in recent history. We repeat, the Superman exists, and he is American.
There are a lot of American-themed superheroes. Captain America, Superman, US Agent, Iron Patriot. The point is, America is rooted within comic books, and comic book characters. Manhattan states,
They explain the name has been chosen for the ominous associations it will raise in America's enemies.
Snyder follows this with shots of Manhattan destroying a tank without even touching it, showing his godly powers. In showing this moment, the origin in the character's name, Snyder addresses the way America sees superheroes as extended metaphors for themselves. There is a line in Watchmen in which Night Owl asks the comedian,
What happened to the American dream?
The comedian, with a gun attached to his back and one in his hands, responds,
What happened to the American dream? It came true. You're looking at it.
Snyder, in perhaps his most clever of moments, has two costumed heroes discoursing over the prophesized idea of peace amongst violence. The superhero, or the idea of it, is the American dream of today. Tying in with what I said about Dr. Manhattan, box office wise, audiences flock to see any superhero film. DC Comics, Marvel, it doesn't matter. Violence and America go hand in hand, and Snyder, through these costume supers, communicates this. Snyder is a divisive filmmaker. In some people's eyes, he's one of the best Hollywood has to offer. To others, he's just a useless hack. Much like the director's work with Batman v Superman, Snyder has developed a film worth watching, worth enjoying, and maybe even worth analysing. Where some can see Snyder's adaptation as a brash and surface-level interpretation, others, like myself, see this film as a reflection of comic book cinema, a loud and insightful look at metafiction, a consistent joke. To paraphrase Ozymandias, the greatest practical joke in comic book film history.
Rorschach's Journal, October 12th, 1985. Tonight, a comedian died in New York.